give you a minute or so to roll in here. Welcome to CAPS Counselor Coffee Talk. Good morning to some of you if you're on the West Coast like I am, or maybe you're having your lunch as you're listening if you're on the East Coast. All right, everybody is rolling in here. So let me kick this off. I think we'll still have a few people rolling in. It's always great to see where you all are. So if you want to pop in the chat where you are in the country, that's great. It's fun for me to see where everybody's coming from. So go ahead and do that. And welcome to people that have been here before. Welcome back. If you are new, welcome. Welcome to CAP. Welcome to the Coffee Talk. Thanks for that. Yeah, we got people all over the country. That's great. Awesome. So we do this every other week at noon Eastern for you, for school counselors. This is a place where we'll talk about specific things that are relevant in the college planning journey. And right now, that's the FAFSA. But other times it will be like a grab bag. So come on, ask anything and everything that's on your mind around college financial planning. Our goal is to be your source of truth, is to be your support system. I know different schools, you all play different roles as far as how deep you go into this space. So, just think of us as a resource. And I'll talk about at the end that, we can support you. We have an education series. We have a woman, some of you know, Anne Marie Sanderson, who is our coordinator of high school partnerships. Her sole job, she's actually on her way to a local ASCA conference in Pennsylvania to talk to school counselors. So her whole focus is to work with you to see how we can support you, support your families. And I'll talk a little bit more about that toward the end. For people that are new, and I'm not on here all the time, Matt Carpenter is almost all the time on here. My partner in crime. He's one of the co-founders at CAP. He had a board meeting today, so you get me solo today. And I'm kind of the FAFSA person on the staff anyways. My role is director of education, so I educate parents in this process, professionals, the whole bit. So this fits really nicely in what I do, what I love to do. So happy to be here. This is being recorded, so you'll get the recording. And if you have questions, I will plan to talk some about the FAFSA, and then I'll pop into the Q&A, and I'll do my best to answer all your questions. So my ask is to put your questions in the Q&A as opposed to the chat, and you can be anonymous in the Q&A, which some people like. And then it's also just one place for me to look. So what I want to do today is talk through the FAFSA. We did a special Counselor Coffee Talk last Wednesday because it was supposed to go live December 1, as you all know, and it went live to everybody outside of the beta a little early, which was good. Just a few things observations from us, because we work with, thousands of families, helping them in this process. So our team of experts have worked with a lot of families since the beta and into when it went live to everybody. And honestly, so far, so good. There's been a few glitches here and there, but nothing like last year where it was just constant tech issues. And today, I'll pull up some slides in a minute, but I'm going to talk through like best practice to submit it, because we have seen glitches when people do it one way versus another. It was interesting. I sat on the Federal Student Aid, did a webinar yesterday that was very consumer focused, and I always jump on those just kind of listen with one ear while I'm working. And one of the ways they said you could do the FAFSA, we've actually had issues doing it that way. So that will not be my approach for best practice. But good news is It's much better than last year. So the changes they made, the people they brought in to handle the tech, that's all been good. They've tripled the number of customer service people on the helpline. In the past, I was never a big advocate for the helpline. I haven't called because I just don't need to, but there won't be as long wait times for families. That is another thing that they did. I will also make sure that I post for you. I have information about, they just came out with new information about if parents don't have social security numbers, the student's eligible, the student can submit the FAFSA. They've made a change on how you do that. And so I have, last time it wouldn't go in the chat correctly, so I've changed it around. So I will definitely post that, and I'm gonna put a big note here. I will put that in the chat for all of you because I know probably at some of your schools that's very relevant. So I want to make sure that we hit that whole population since they're trying to address that. There are a few questions, so let me look at them and then I'll go into my slides. I had a parent ask a FAFSA question today. The 2023 taxes are currently being audited. Do they need to wait until the audit is resolved and the taxes are refiled before? What I would do, basically the question is the family's being audited or the parents are. I would submit, I would watch those deadlines and submit, especially if they're eligible for need-based aid. I wouldn't wait. Now, with the CSS profile, it won't be an issue. With the FAFSA, when they get in there, for most families, you have to do the auto import from the IRS. And so if the return's being audited, I know when returns were amended, there were some issues in the past. So if it's in the middle of an audit, they'll just have to see if they get an error message and it pops up as an error. If it does, then hopefully they will give them, that family, the option to manually enter the adjusted gross income and the earnings and the federal income taxes paid, all those fields that auto move. Now you don't have a choice like you used to in the old days. 2 years ago, you could say, nah, I don't want to do the data retrieval tool. I want to manually enter. Now, unless you fall into an exception, it auto pulls. So if it auto pulls and there's an error because there's an audit, and I'm just hypothesizing that that could happen. If it doesn't and it auto moves in, you're good to go. If the audit changes the tax return, then they're going to have to deal with that on the back end if there's significant changes. But if it pulls over, then they just continue with the FAFSA and go. If it gives an error, it might prompt them to manually enter that. Hopefully that's what happens, because the key thing for families is to get that submitted, get it in before deadlines. So, but I would not wait and miss deadlines. Definitely just get it done, and then make sure they're paying attention, because if it's significantly different, especially if it goes down, but either way, they're probably going to need to address that with the college. My students' parents had an EFC last year of 28,850. This year it was almost $304,000. No change in income and assets. How could it dramatically? I have no idea. That is a massive, massive change. So my thought is something, they need to check their inputs, because you do input assets. And so maybe a couple zeros got added on to an asset. And that's shooting it up. I mean, that's a massive, massive change. So that's my first thought, is check for any errors, input errors on the family's part, and the student can log in and go look at the FAFSA submission summary, and make sure that nothing jumps out at them. With the direct data exchange, which is the new name for the data retrieval tool, the DRT, that's that auto pull. When you look on the FAFSA submission summary, it doesn't tell you what came in. It never has. That's always been a challenge for me when I'm supporting families, because I can't see. For this exact reason here, you can't see, oh, something pulled over wrong. If they did not make an error, then they are going to want to reach out to FAFSA. We can't help with that because we're not FAFSA, we're not the federal government. So they're going to need to reach out and escalate it and say, you know, what the heck's going on here? Basically, this number doesn't make sense. But the first thing they should do is check check to make sure that there weren't any glaring errors, because sometimes people will, you know, add a couple zeros or whatever, and that can change things. Can a family withhold the following information: savings account balance, investment portfolios, equity, and homes? They cannot withhold it. Some people are exempt from sharing assets, and there's certain rules around that. That used to be called simplified needs test, and then they changed that name as well to applicants exempt from asset reporting or something like that, which is very clear what it is. So you can't make the choice. If those fields come up, and those are the main fields, you've got it exactly right. It's the savings and checking account balance. Then it'll say net worth of investments. That includes anything, not checking and savings, because the family already shared that, but any non-retirement assets. So not 401ks, IRAs, all that stuff, but anything else goes in there. If they have stock from their company, it's only vested, not the unvested. And real estate, but not their primary home. And it says it right there. Do not include your primary home, but any other equity in real estate. So that means they have a, excuse me, like a second home. They're going to take the market value minus mortgage, any liens they have, and that's their equity. The key thing there is they don't want to inflate their market value. They don't want to lie, but they want to find the lowest defensible market value for their properties and then subtract their debts. There's also something called the IRS quick sale value, because when you sell a property, you don't walk away with everything, right? You don't just pay the bank. There's realtors, there's closing costs, all that fun stuff. So that's something we help families with one-on-one quite a bit, how to value business and that. So keep that in mind, and I'll talk about how we can support your families, everything at the end. But you can't opt out of those. If they don't pop up, then you don't answer them. But otherwise, you do have to answer those questions. The people where it won't pop up is if you're eligible for maximum Pell, if you have an adjusted gross income that's below 60,000, but then there's other things below it. You can't file certain schedules, or else that bumps you out. And then the third one is if in 2023 or 2024 the family participated in any of the federal benefit programs like Medicaid, the different programs like that, then that can cause it as well. So I don't know the root of your question, but hopefully that answers it. Father passed away this year, but is still listed on the 2023 FAFSA. What is the process and what advice should be offered to the mother? So this is one of those situations. So and sorry for your family, first of all, that's super hard. In 2023, the family filed married filing jointly. So now dad passed away this year. So I'm guessing the mom is still gonna file married filing jointly because it's best for taxes and they were married part of the year, but I'm not a CPA, so I'm not saying that for sure. But if she's filing a different way and she says, oh, I was married in the base year, in the prior year, 2023, now my situation is different and I'm a widow, that's one of those exceptions where she'll be manually entering her information. If that pops up, then we should really meet with her, because I can't give exact advice without seeing their tax return and understanding more about their situation. But if she's prompted to manually enter, then she's probably going to want to think about what was dad's part of the income, and what's my part, and she's definitely going to be wanting to appeal. So a family like that could really benefit with working with us, just because we've been around the block with this. These hard things happen, right? And you know, they want to put their best foot forward with the colleges and make sure the colleges really understand the situation. So hopefully that helps. They received no financial aid last year. Should they appeal to FAFSA or the individual schools, twins in different schools? So the way it works with multiples in school, I think probably all of you know that they took that out of the federal methodology. So the SAI does not change at all, but the colleges can absolutely take that into account. They can say for not for giving out federal money, but for giving out their institutional grants, which is a huge chunk of money, they can take it into account. I was super excited when I found that out before the 24-25 school year, because I thought, oh, great. Well, these families can still appeal. They can still grab institutional money. The colleges can do what's called exercise professional judgment, recalculate that SAI for their money. But what happened was last year was so crazy with the FAFSA and all the tech issues that it really didn't even hit on my radar at all that we had that going on at all. As we all know, it was crazy. So I think the schools were just chasing their tail just to get award letters out, and they were concerned about their enrollment and their yields and everything else. So it almost wasn't a thing last year. But that's the takeaway there, is that they absolutely can appeal to schools. And that's where it's super important to cast a wide net when they're building that college list of competing schools, because even with other appeals, this is true, other types of appeals that I've helped families with and our team has, sometimes you'll do the same appeal to 3 different schools. And some of them will say, yeah, we hear you. And all of a sudden they come in with a lot of money, whereas another school might come in with none and then something in the middle. And then you can appeal off of those and say, well, thank you for that amount, but XYZ school gave this amount. Can you match it? Or can you add an extra da 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 da? That's all part of the appeal strategy. So they definitely, and the colleges know, because there is a question on the FAFSA that says how many are in college. So I had twins, right? They're gone, they're done with school, but I would have been all over that. If I were a parent with a senior right now, I would be appealing. Once you got to wait till you get those award letters back, and then you can be really clear on appeal. And again, that's something that we can guide families on one-on-one. Even though FAFSA does not acknowledge multiple, are colleges making changes? Okay, I already got that one. I answered both of those. So hopefully you heard that. They can take that into account. It's just a matter of, are they going to? Some schools might say across the board. Yeah, I think the key thing is if their competitors are not doing it, then they might not. The CSS schools, the CSS profile schools, what we've seen in practice is they're continuing to take that into account, 30 to 40% change. And they didn't make the switch to calling it an SAI, the CSS schools. They are still calling it an EFC, or they're calling it a family contribution, which I actually think is okay, because maybe it helps the family see, okay, SAI is the federal, and then EFC is the CSS schools and their funds and how they're calculating it. So I don't think it's a bad thing, but we have seen them doing it. We absolutely can appeal on that. And again, if you've got competing schools, you can bounce them off. If all the schools are kind of jumping on the same bandwagon and saying, yep, we're following the federal methodology. I mean, I tell families as they're building a list, if they have twins or triplets, like junior year, give that school a call and say, hey, what's your policy? I know the government doesn't take it into account. Are you guys doing this on appeal? And then parents can get a feel. So as they're building the list, they know, all right, we're not going to get any credit for the triplets. And that's where CSS profile schools can end up being significantly different in the SAI/EFC, just because of multiples in school. And it doesn't have to be twins. Quite often we have a junior. I mean, we have kids that are 2 years apart. So they have 3 crossover years. And they might as well, I always tell families, play the cards you have to try and cut the cost of college as best you can. So hopefully those are similar questions. Is that Googleable? IRS quick sale value. It's value. IRS quick sale value. I think so. It's like 15 to 20%, and it's legit. Like, it's not a cap made up thing. It's the IRS. So yeah, I think you can Google it. I don't know that I ever have. But it's value, IRS quick sale value. The key thing with valuing is you want to make sure that a family doesn't put something absurd, right? They can go to Google and Redfin. And if it's so low and they look at the zip code and say, oh, this is Silicon Valley, and they're saying that their house is worth blah, 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 that's ridiculous. And then they start going online. And also realize for families, this is a completely appealable item. That's where your family's really understanding the estimates of what their net costs, and I'll show you in a minute in our software that we can make available to your families. That net cost is so important for them to have an idea for different schools and to have good estimates of their SAI/EFC, because then they're in the driver's seat. Like, they know, all right, this isn't what I expected. So what's going on here? And that helps them be in a position of authority and be able to approach the schools, because schools are doing some funky stuff. Like, I'll share, like Boston College, for example. We've had kids that applied ED. The packages have come back, and it's clear to us that's a CSS profile school. As we all know, they were not giving the sibling discount. So through appeal, we're reaching out, helping that family, because they're working with us to say, hey, what's going on here? And they're like, oh, yes, we do the discount. They just didn't offer it. So we have them offer the discount. So all of these things are going on. So if families don't know what they should expect from a school, they have no idea to say, is this right? Maybe I'm not getting the full amount. And I've seen that just speaking from early decision alone, because those are starting to come back, right? We're right in that week. I think the Ivies are tomorrow or something. They should know, like, this is kind of what I'm expecting, because schools can, what we, under award, and they know they're under awarding. And if a family is so delighted to have gotten in, they say, oh, this is great, we got 10,000 in need-based aid or whatever it is. Yay, you got in, when in fact they're under awarding and they could reach back out. Worst thing that happens is they say no. But if the school's under awarding, they might be like, all right, well, the family knows their stuff, so we'll add more, right? And this could be, I mean, my examples, tens of thousands of dollars. So it's a big deal. So it's very important, and I'll show that. It's very important for families to understand this. Okay. All right. So what is the protocol for a family whose dad is in the home working but does not file taxes? Only mom states she files claims senior as dependent. If dad is not filing taxes because he's not required to, then he'll fill out a non-filer form on the CSS side. If he's not required on the FAFSA, you mark it, and then he's going to manually enter his information. But if he's just not filing taxes because he doesn't want to, that's going to be an issue, because I don't know if they're married or what their situation is, but they're going to want the income and tax information from both parents. So if they're married and she's married filing separately, they're going to want to know about dad in that situation. And who claims who, that's not a big thing for financial aid. So you don't have to worry about that piece. Is there a place on the FAFSA to indicate 2024 income is much less? No, but that's your appeal. That is huge. And that happens all the time. Stuff happens in life, right? It would happen en masse with COVID. People were like, all right, well, what happened in 2019? Now my business is shut down, so that's an appeal. So you have to follow through, do 2023, and then you're going to be appealing to the colleges. Like I said, we can definitely step in. There's nuances to that, and it's just like everything in life. If you do it enough, you kind of know, how to do this correctly, how to approach the schools correctly, because if you approach them that you're buying a car, they're gonna turn them off, and that's gonna be the end, right? So there's a correct way of, should the student be leading the charge, how to do that. We talk all about that when we do all of our appeals stuff. Quick sale value. The IRS reduced the value of your assets by a certain amount. Yep, usually 20% to arrive at the price you would get if you had to sell them quickly without time to consider lots of different. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. Would Tara put it, that's the IRS quick sale value, right? And it's, like I said, it's legit, it's real. I always tell families when I work with them, some people look at me and say, I'm uncomfortable with that. Like, it's your form. Never do anything dishonest, never lie. It's fraud, right? It's a federal form. But, I always tell families, if you're staring at the ceiling and you can't sleep at night because you feel uncomfortable using the IRS quick sale value, then don't. But I think people realize, this is it's a legit way to do it. But also there's a nuance. So you have to be really careful, because if you use the IRS quick sale value and then comparing it to comps, it's super low, that is going to jump out at the CSS profile schools. And remember, this is all CSS profile when we're looking at the home they live in, because that doesn't go on the FAFSA. The primary home does not go on the FAFSA, only other real estate, but the CSS profile, it's completely on there. I run our local scholarship process. We need to see what the student's financial need is, what report out of the FAFSA should I be asking for to evaluate need? What numbers do you think accurately reflect need for middle class families? When you submit the FAFSA, you get the SAI. The need is different from school to school. I mean, Columbia is over 100,000 a year. And then, of course, community college is the other extreme in cost, and then everything in between. So more and more families are eligible for need-based aid because the sticker prices keep going up, right? So evaluating need, it starts with having a good estimate of the SAI. That's where this whole thing starts from. So I don't know that FAFSA has an estimator. I don't love it. I was just talking to a colleague about it this morning because it doesn't ask everything that's actually in the formula. So it actually kind of bugs me that they put that out there, because then consumers use it. If they're going to put out a tool, I would rather have them make people spend more time to populate it so that it's more accurate. But that's what's out there. So I don't know of a report, and you don't say the Jones family has this amount of need, 40,000. That's just not how it works, because at one school, they have an SAI of 40,000. They could have no need. I'm outside of Seattle. At University of Washington, at Wazoo, there's no need because they don't cost that much. But at Columbia, there's 60,000 plus of need, and they're great at meeting need, right? So it really depends on, there isn't, this is my need everywhere. It doesn't work that way. Let me just take a minute, since there's all these questions that seem to be relevant. Let me just share my screen for a second, because I want to show you just real quick. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but this is our consumer facing software that we have a free version of, where your families can plug in up to 3 schools and they see everything here. You see the key things to draw out here: federal SAI estimate, as well as the CSS profile. There's a range here because we take into account in tranches how much home equity that school looks at. That's a big difference, as we all know, between the FAFSA and the CSS profile, that primary home equity that I mentioned. So we do our best. I mean, our goal is to bring transparency to families in an arena that's very opaque, especially with the CSS profile. It's really, really not transparent. So we're trying to do our best. We're never going to be spot on with the IM. But if, like I said earlier, families have an idea about this, and then they actually look at the schools and see, hey, Columbia costs this much, this is our net cost. Columbia doesn't look at home equity. So a family that maybe doesn't have much cash in the bank, maybe has a little bit of 401ks and stuff, which usually you shouldn't be tapping, and there's penalties and the whole bit. They're asset rich potentially, but liquid poor. They don't have liquid assets. Columbia could be great. And we're saying, hey, you're going to get about almost 64,000 in need-based grants based on how they self-report that they meet need. Big difference between Columbia and Northwestern, because Northwestern looks at a lot more home equity. So what we're doing here is we're giving the families SAI estimates / EFC, but then we're estimating the net cost, and we're telling them based on their child. We have merit scholarships built in here, so it's not just need-based. We'll project merit as well as need-based aid. So this, just like I said earlier, it levels the playing field some, because it gets them educated, and then, they can at least know, they can understand financial aid, and they can understand where they fit at different schools. So in the free version, they can put up to 3 schools. Then they can also upgrade. You as a high school or district could pay to make this available to your students. I'll share. We have Anne Marie Sanderson, who I mentioned earlier. She's our coordinator and is our key contact with all of you. And so she's the person. Let me just put this in the chat. I'm kind of jumping around because you guys had such great questions. Changing my order here, but I'm going to put this link in the chat. This is where you can book a time to chat with Anne Marie. If you look here, this goes right to her calendar. And then MyCap is what we call that software that I just showed you. You can go in there and play around in the software, see everything it does. You guys are all on Counselor Coffee Talk. You're here, so you don't need to do that piece. That's off the list. And then, we have education. Education is key for families. As much as I can tell you all day how great our software is, honestly, without the foundation and the education, parents just don't know what they don't know. And so that gives them the foundation. Okay, now I can see myself in the software. Oh, and that's what that means. And that's what you mean by that. And it really helps bring it all together. And then we can offer support in different ways to them one-on-one. But the key thing is, my key being the director of education, is inviting your family so that we can educate them, right? And then we can say, here's a free tool, go in, put in your 3 schools, start moving through this journey as an educated consumer. But first step here, just book a time with Anne Marie right through here. Put in your stuff, click submit, and you're off to the races there. Let me see. I'm happy to jump into my FAFSA slides if we have time, but definitely I'm here to answer your questions, and you guys have so many good ones today. This is great. May I get the recording of this session? Yeah, you should automatically, you're in here, you registered, you should automatically get it. But I'll just jot down your email. And also, we have a special, actually, Maria, we have a special dedicated email for all of you, and I'll put it in the chat, but it's easy to remember. It's just counselor at, I think it's counselor, I'm sorry, not counselors, counselor at collegeaidpro.com. That's dedicated to you. It comes in as that. We know you're a counselor. So if questions come up, sometimes people are like, I didn't get the recording. Sometimes it's in your spam, or it's in a promotion, the promotions folder. If you have Gmail, don't hesitate to email and say, hey, I was on the coffee talk. I really want the recording. I didn't see it. And we'll shoot it right off to you. I mean, we have people on our support desk. That's all they do, right? They're manning it, not Saturdays, and not at midnight, but we try and have some work-life balance at CAP. But during business hours, we're really intentional about responding to emails. So if you don't get the recording, and just realize in general, if something comes up and you're like, think of us, as I said at the beginning, think of us as your resource. When to appeal your essay, when should you appeal to FAFSA or wait until you get your awards from each school and then appeal to the specific school? Current sophomores in college. Yeah, usually you wait until you get the financial aid award letter because that's what you're appealing off of. Since the kids are current students, I would reach out to the colleges and say, hey, what's your timeline to get award letters out to upperclassmen? Because most colleges focus on the freshmen, right? They're trying to build that new class and bring in that new class. So that's how most of them prioritize, and the deadlines are later, usually for the upperclassmen. So I guess I'm old. I pick up the phone and I call places and say, hey, how is this going to work? And they could even run it by, hey, we have a significant change in circumstance, because it's only one school. And the students, maybe I'm assuming they're at different schools or it's the same school, whatever it is, the kids. You can reach out to the school, see what their timeline is for upperclassmen, because you want to have time to evaluate. With upperclassmen, they're, unless it's severe and the college just won't do anything with it, they're probably going to stay there. Whereas with freshmen, incoming freshmen, you want to have time to be able to keep appealing, and before that May 1 decision, it's a little different with upperclassmen because you can keep appealing. And you can appeal more than once. There's just a right way to do it, but you're not appealing to FAFSA. It's all about the colleges. It's always going to be a reach out. And if it's need-based aid, you're going to be reaching out to the financial aid office. If the family's appealing merit, which is very common, we do that all the time, then that's an appeal to Office of Admissions, because that's where the merit comes from. So two different parts of the colleges and universities. Okay. All right, so great questions. Love it. Okay, so why don't I take a minute and I'll just pop up a few of my slides here. I just wanted to cover, I'll just stick to like best practices around the FAFSA. What are we seeing? Because I know a lot of schools, if the kids, some of the deadlines, are not until January because of all the delays. So you probably have families that are still doing this. This slide I won't spend a lot of time on. I know I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but a lot of families will just push back on submitting the forms because their neighbor or their sister told them they're not going to get anything. It's not worthwhile. We really, really strong. Most families should be submitting both forms. Every family absolutely should be submitting the FAFSA. They might be wrong thinking they're not eligible for need-based aid. Some schools want it on file for merit aid, which doesn't make sense, but it is what it is. The other big one, this third one, is a big one for me because I've tried to help families with this. Some schools, if you literally don't apply for financial aid freshman year, in their mind, you're telling them, we never need aid. Maybe merit will come in, but we don't need need-based aid. And something happened sophomore, junior year. People have written in today, things happen, people pass away. It's life, right? And then you go back to the college and they say, sorry, we can't do that. And I've had schools do that through the years. I'm not saying it's the lion's share, but that's a big one. Sometimes appeals are more successful. If they see that FAFSA on file, they feel like, oh, well, the family has skin in the game. Maybe they'll take the direct federal loans, because when they make decisions on appeals, they have algorithms and they figure out, if we give this family another 2,000 or whatever it happens to be, what's the likelihood we're going to get that deposit slip? These schools are nonprofits, but they are big businesses. They are making decisions based on that. They really, really are. And then, of course, the direct student loans, which are usually the best place to start for most families that need some help with debt. With loans, that's the best place to start. Plus, it truly is the students. It's the only thing that's really a student loan in my mind, because there's no co-signing. Anybody can pay it off, and it's good for the student's credit history. So it's a win-win. It can be paid off a week later. But without the FAFSA, they're not eligible. So that's that. So let's just talk about this. I think most of you probably know that only that one parent is submitting it in divorced and separated families. That's the parent that provided the most financial support on a year look back. Not in 2023. It's not based on a tax year. So there is some planning. I'm a financial planner by background. So if a family's not going to submit that till January 15th and they truly are 50-50, how much they support that child financially, have the parent that's more advantageous pay a little bit more for soccer or whatever it happens to be, violin lessons or whatever. They're being honest and they're putting their best foot forward. So this is the government, didn't say whoever has the biggest, the greater adjusted gross income. That's the fallback. But in my mind, you should never need to go to the fallback. If it is 50-50, play the best cards there. And if the parents, and that's an if in some family situations, can be amicable and come to the table together, the two X's, for the benefit of the student, for the benefit of both of them, to gather more of the endowment money, more discounts from the colleges and less out of the parent and child's pocket, more the better, right? This concept of contributors, those are the people that need to contribute to the student FAFSA. So first thing, and I think I have a slide, everybody should have their federal student aid IDs and passwords. If your families haven't done that, they need to go to the studentaid.gov site and get those done today, ASAP, because that information goes to the Social Security Administration. They have to verify that person is who they say they are, and that can take a few days. And now it's probably a little longer because they're getting bombarded. So they need to do that. But it's important for them to know which parent needs to do that. The student always has to do it. So student needs to do it. If the parents are married and it's married filing jointly is how they file, only one parent needs to do it. Because when they go into their part of the FAFSA, they're going to consent for their federal tax information to flow into their part of the FAFSA, which will go into the student FAFSA. Only one parent needs to consent because there's one tax return. If the parents are married filing separately, sorry, both parents need those IDs because they each have to consent to their return coming in. If they're divorced or separated, only that custodial parent needs it, because the non-custodial parent is not involved in the FAFSA at all. Now, if you have a family and they've already submitted the CSS, which is common because those deadlines have come and gone for early decision and early action at schools, then it needs to match. The custodial parent needs to be the same. So it could be a foregone conclusion. It can change from year to year, though. So when they go in there, they're going to consent. When they do that consent, it's irrevocable for that year. So they can't go in and do it and then say, I've changed my mind. If they don't consent for that data to move, the student is not going to be eligible for federal aid unless they fall into an unusual circumstance. If it's just the parents are able, but they just don't feel like sharing, it's not going to be a valid FAFSA. Here's the link. Just make sure it's easy to Google. Make sure they're on studentaid.gov, because there could be some copycat sites because they are putting in their date of birth and their social security number. Very private information that can be used for identity theft. So they need to be careful they're in the right spot. If parents have an FSA ID for another child or for when they went to college recently, they're fine. It's for that individual. And each student needs one. If somebody has triplets, they are doing 3 FAFSAs because it's the student FAFSA. That's a super common question that parents are like, well, can't I just, mesh all my kids together? No, that's not how it works. This is the flow. This is I copied a slide from last year from federal student aid. There's the student part of the FAFSA, and then there's all the contributors. This one is just showing one parent as a contributor. There could be more than one, but this is best practice coming from CAP, from just what we've seen. One, do this in Chrome. We've had some small issues with not being able to populate certain fields. When people are on an iPad, they're on Safari. So on an Apple, on a Mac, you can do Safari. So we recommend doing Safari. We also recommend that the parent doesn't go in, log in, and start their FAFSA. The FSA ED did that webinar yesterday, like I said, and they said, oh, parents can do that. We've seen issues with that. So my recommendation is log in with the student FSA ID and password. The family sits there, does it. Then they go through the student, they can sign, and during the process, and I'll show you a screen in a minute, they're going to invite the contributors. The contributors are going to get an email. They go in, log in with each contributor's FSA ID and password. They do their part and sign. And once all the contributors have contributed, then it will be complete. That's what we recommend for best practice and flow. I'm not saying that it won't work if a parent goes in and signs before the student signed. We have some experts on our team that have guided families that way and it's worked out. But I just, especially when we're talking to parents, I don't want to give them two ways to do it. It's confusing enough for them anyways. So let me just show you a few quick slides. This is the main page. I just tell people go to FAFSA.gov. It'll take you to a different URL, but it's easy to remember. Make sure they're going into the 25-26, because if they scroll down, the 24-25 is still there. They go in there, again, use the appropriate FSA ID and password. This would be the student. There is two-factor authentication, which is good for protection. So I tell parents, if you're working on this, make sure if your student is there, you have access if they get shot their code via text or to their email, because you're going to need that code. The parents are going to need it as well to get into their part. Then they get in. I say, it's the student. There's a series of videos. I tell people, just watch the 4 videos. They're short. Gives them a really good overview, just the first time. Then they are going to consent and approve. This is key. Like I said, if they don't do this, it's not going to be valid. So they've got to do that. And then this is new this year. The government's going to show, hey, we're importing your information. It's loading, and fingers crossed, it works and it's pretty quick. If there's an issue, they might get this data not received. Sometimes it's because of an exception, and then they are going to manually enter some information. Then there's 5 sections, just like I showed you on that best practice slide. Personal circumstances. There's a few pieces in here that are worth kind of calling out. If the student falls into any of these categories where they have special circumstances, they need to hit yes. That they cannot get parent information. Fortunately, most kids don't fall into this category, but there are some. So that's there as a call out for those students. There's also this question from last year that created a lot of confusion because just the way it's worded. If parents are submitting this with their child, just so the student can be eligible for unsubsidized student loans that aren't based on need, then they need to mark yes here. Most families should be marking no, because it's a dependent student in this case. So the parents need to supply their information. The parents are going to supply it. So they should mark no. Some people just read quickly and say, well, yeah, of course I want to be eligible. I'm just going to click yes. If they do, they're going to get a pop-up, which is new this year, saying, are you sure you want to mark yes? Because you will not be eligible for most federal aid. And it also means institutional aid for the schools that only use the FAFSA, which is the lion's share of public and private schools. They don't use the CSS. So then if somebody's like, oops, then they can return to the form. And that's a great addition this year. Then they ask about the parents, and then this invite comes up. So this is where the contributors need to be listed. You're going to see here, say it's a married filing jointly family. One parent's a contributor. So you can pop in that parent's information. It says it really small here in italics, optional. If you add it, it should be fine. The key thing is it needs to exactly match and be accurate. The email address to what that contributor used to set up their FSA account. And the contributor can log back into their studentaid.gov and see. I've had things where people, they put in their middle name because they go by it. And then Then when they're doing the FAFSA, they don't. It's very persnickety. So it needs to exactly match, or there could be an error. But they go ahead, send off that invite, and move along. The demographic section is pretty straightforward. There's a bunch of not required questions about race, ethnicity. So people can say prefer not to answer or answer it. It's just for data for ED. Then you get into the financials. The financial section, if that data successfully moved from the IRS, should be much shorter. As we talked about earlier, and your great questions brought it up, most families will see asset questions, and the main ones are checking and savings. Did they have rollovers from their pension or IRAs? From an old 401k into an IRA, if those were rollovers, and checking and savings, net worth of investments, business value. Those are the big ones because no businesses are excluded anymore, even the small ones. On the parent side, they're going to talk about family size. Used to be called household size. They just changed it to family. What we're finding there is routinely that number that populates is not right. So families need to look at that and check that number, because if the household size is not accurate and it's smaller than it is, than it should be, they need to update that. Bigger household, it helps lower the SAI. Number in college, that's only on the parent page because the parents are going to have financial too. Business value, if applicable. But as I've said, most submitters are not going to see adjusted gross income, earnings, federal income tax paid. If there's going to be a child support question, if that's applicable to the family, and this is a little confusing, but it's child support paid in 2023, not a year look back, not all that kind of stuff. So it's basically, actually, let me fix that. It's actually the previous tax year. So if a family is submitting it on January 3rd of 2025, then it's child support received in 2024. So it's kind of confusing. And I think they have that listed there to help families, but that's just a number that they will populate. Then the student this is on the student side only. They put in all their schools up to 20. If they have more than 20, they got to send it off, let it process, log back in, make sure that FAFSA process. They can log into their studentaid.gov, check that. That's really important. If they delete before it's been processed, then all those schools, those first 20, are not going to get it correctly. Then delete, add the few schools, and resend. Good news this year, the ICERs, all that data that goes to the colleges has been moving just like old school, very quickly over to the colleges. So they're getting it. They're able to do award letters. We're not seeing delays there. Then the student signs. And what's nice over here, and this is a screenshot of the parent side, because there's only 3 parts to the parent side. But I always tell people on the student side, it'll have the colleges and the other pieces, demographics for them. Click on the arrows, just make sure nothing jumps out that, oops, I added some zeros to the assets or whatever. Then you can go back in and make the edits before this person, the student or the contributor, actually clicks the box and signs. Once they do that, if the student does it, it's going to say, great, you're almost there. Your section is complete. Here's your contributor. There might be more than one on a given family. And then the other contributors are going to go in. They can go through the email invite that they get. If they don't get it, they log into their studentaid.gov and they're going to see this. They accept the invitation and then they're into their FAFSA, and it rolls through those 3 sections. And then they follow it, they sign it, and then you'll get a congratulations, the form's complete. Some people are getting their SAI estimate on there. Kind of depends on the flow of how you do it. The key thing here is it says it's complete and you've got a completion date. Tell your families to screenshot that, grab it. Okay, because that's their proof. If a school comes back and says, hey, you missed the deadline, screenshot it, print a PDF. The student will also get an email. And the students need to be all over their email. My kids are 31 and they don't use email very much. They do, but they don't. But kids need to realize in this process that parents need to tell them, you got to be all over your email, and forward it to the parents because they're going to communicate with them. So that's the flow there. So hopefully that kind of helps with best practice. Let me just see, there's one more question. CSS profile. dad is not in the picture, does pay child support, will not provide information, what can the student do? So there is a waiver, because with the CSS, there's the main CSS that the custodial parent and the student submit, then there's a non-custodial profile. There is a waiver that can be submitted to each school. College Board has a form, but you need to check with each school to see if they have a form that's similar that they use instead of College Boards. The issue here, what I'm reading into your question is, you say dad's not in the picture, but usually for a waiver to be successful, the student has like no doesn't interact with the parent at all. It might be because it's not safe for the student, or whatever the reasons are, or the parent's off the grid. If the parent's paying child support, they're not completely off the grid. Unfortunately, if a parent just doesn't want to do the form, that's usually not going to get approved on the waiver. And the issue with that is, if both parents that are required don't submit it, this college could say, yep, we're not giving you, they have to award federal aid off the FAFSA. And if they're eligible for state aid, states usually use the FAFSA, but the college can say, it comes to our institutional funds, we're not going to do it unless dad submits it. So maybe the family needs to, have a conversation like, really, this is going to cause undue hardship on your child if you don't submit this form. And you can emphasize that it's private. The both forms go to College Board. Neither biological parent can see the information of the other parent. That's kept very private if that's part of their reason for not wanting to do it. All right, so we got all the questions. We got 3 minutes left. So I'll just share this one more time up here. I'll share the link with you again. I really recommend you talking to Anne Marie just to talk about how we can further support your high school or your district. We work with thousands of schools in the country. If you want a reference, hey, we'd love to talk to, I'm going to put the link to this document in the chat where you can book with Anne Marie right away and then get into the software. It's kind of got everything in one place. If you want to talk to somebody just as a reference, how have you worked with College Aid Pro? How is it done? What is your parent reactions? Yada, yada. We're happy to give you some references as well, but that's really the next step there. Book some time to chat with Anne Marie. Any help on what to say to a family that filed bankruptcy and did not file taxes? You don't file taxes, it's rough. I mean, you've got to, it would be really helpful if the family files taxes. I'm not a CPA, so if there's a reason they didn't file taxes because it wasn't required, then they can mark that on the forms, not required, and then they'll ask for other information on the CSS side, and on the FAFSA side, they'll manually input information. If, the other option is to call some of the colleges if they were required to file, because usually having that tax return is the foundation. That's why I always tell people too, another little data point or info for all of you. If a family needs to appeal, which you all had some questions around families that should definitely be appealing, tell them if they file their own taxes or they have a CPA, do their 2024 taxes ASAP, the minute they can in 2025. So if they've got all their W-2s and they have an easy tax return, once they get all that information, get it filed. Tell their CPA, hey, I need to be first in line, because when they appeal, what colleges will routinely do is say, okay, you're telling us 2023 was way better than your current reality, doesn't demonstrate your current reality. They're going to say, great, let's have your 2024 return, because that's an official view of what's going on financially in that family from an income standpoint. So it's really important to have that done, because that'll help move that appeal through. So that's just another kind of insider tip. There's another thing called a tax transcript. And I strongly recommend that families get that. You can get that on irs.gov. It's free. What that is like a mini official summary of a tax return. And some schools will take that on appeal, so then you don't have to send the whole tax return. I'm always like, hey, share the least amount we can, especially of very confidential information with colleges, just because of all the crazy hacking and everything that goes on nowadays. So those are two tidbits. Do that tax return right away in 2024. And then, request an official transcript because you might be able to submit that. And if there's divorce going on that wasn't the case in the prior year in 2023, that's going to be super helpful as well because it breaks down the tax return. So we're 1 minute over, so I apologize for that, but great questions. It was great. So please book time with Anne Marie so we can chat with you about how we can support you. Any questions, things come up, use that email, counselor@collegeaidpro.com. We would love to support your school, your families, educate your families. And I know we're coming up on, hopefully, all of you are done a week from Friday, is my hope, and you get that whole week off. Sure, schools are closed. And then you get a nice long, maybe you don't even go back until whatever that is, the 6th or 7th of January, because the holidays fall on that Wednesday. So hopefully you get a really long break, because kudos to all of you. I remember my kids that went to a big public school and their counselors had so much on their plate. So you guys need your break. So hopefully everybody, you all have a great break, and please keep us in mind. Let us support you in any way we can. So happy holidays, and we'll see you next time. Take care, everybody.